One of the things that can really help us to understand the importance of executive functioning as a protective factor and as a tool for building resilience is its relationship to anxiety. So it can be difficult to tell whether or not someone is experiencing executive dysfunction because they are anxious and dysregulated, or if they are anxious because they are experiencing executive dysfunction. But regardless of the cause, it is still a protective factor to support kids' executive functioning. This is one of those cyclical things where if you intervene with proactive protective strategies, it can support mental health and resilience, even if we're not 100% certain if the anxiety is resulting from executive dysfunction or if it is due to other things. One of the ways that we can start to understand this relationship is to understand time perception and how it relates to executive functioning challenges. So if we have strong executive functioning and someone tells us a certain length of time, or even gives us a task, and we understand how long it might take, then we get a sense for what that unit of time means in reality. We can visually feel it, sense it, get an idea of how long we're going to be doing that task. You may even picture 15 minutes on a clock. You have a sense for what that means. Or maybe you might think of your Google Calendar and think of that block of time that shows what 15 minutes is. In addition to these visuals, you may have those past experiences to draw on where you can get an even deeper sense of what that means and how long you're going to have to sustain that effort and how effortful the task is going to feel. Part of this has to do with our ability to engage in strategic planning, and part of it has to do with just our overall sense of time. But if you have weak executive functioning, that sense of time is going to be vague. Not only is the sense of what 15 minutes means, if we see the number 15, or if someone tells us that something is going to take 15 minutes, it might seem kind of vague. We may either minimize what that means and not give ourselves enough time, or we might inflate it. And we might take that 15 minutes, especially if it's something that we don't want to do, and it might seem way bigger than it actually is. So if you see that Google Calendar that I've got in the bottom of the screen there, instead of thinking that 15 minutes is that little time block there and just being able to talk ourselves through, just getting started so we can be done, we may inflate it to think that it's way longer than it actually is. And that may cause that anxiety and avoidance because we are thinking that the task is going to be more overwhelming and challenging than it actually is. We may have a difficult time seeing ourselves be successful, pulling from past experiences to be able to utilize our self-talk and encourage ourselves, talk ourselves through the task, or just know what steps to take and how to initiate. Then that task is going to seem way more overwhelming. And then if we do get started with the task, it's going to be difficult for us to pay attention to the time while we're doing the task, so we can shift and adjust as needed. Not being able to see the end goal and the steps to get there can also be something that impacts how we feel about the task that lays ahead of us, how vivid it feels to us, whether or not it feels unfamiliar and attainable, if it seems similar to a past experience that we might have had, and we can talk ourselves through and encourage ourselves to find evidence that we can be successful in the future. So this is what challenging tasks look like to people with strong executive functioning. Yes, it does seem like there might be some challenges ahead of us, but at least the steps to take are clear and we can see where we're going. So while we might experience some discomfort, we might be a little bit nervous, we can get ourselves through it. It feels manageable. But things might seem much less clear if you have executive functioning challenges. The steps to take might seem unclear, and the end goal might be a little bit vague. So the experience overall just seems unfamiliar. And it's pretty normal to feel uncomfortable and nervous about something if we don't know what to expect. But this might be amplified if someone is experiencing executive dysfunction, because not only do they not know what to expect, they may have a difficult time with the self-talk and self-regulation piece. So when that anxiety occurs, they have a more difficult time with managing it. And so whether the anxiety is a symptom or a cause, it still makes sense to support these skills, because if someone is experiencing anxiety because of executive dysfunction, and we teach them skills that are going to improve their ability to plan and improve their sense of time, well, that's going to minimize their anxiety, because they're going to be able to see and feel and believe that they can be successful and see the path ahead of them. And if we have a person who's experiencing anxiety, that planning and those skills that help them plan ahead and really get a sense for how long the effort will be and how difficult a task will also be proactive things that can help them prepare for and manage anxiety. I don't know about you, but when I'm anxious about something, it does make me feel better when I front load and I plan. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about service delivery model and where there are some points of confusion. And this is one of the mistakes that multidisciplinary teams often make. So obviously, there is a place for kids to have a safe place to talk, an adult that is providing a safe space for them. There's certainly a place for therapy to be delivered in a pull-out setting. But pull-out therapy that is addressing things like talking through your feelings and processing your emotions does not build executive functioning skills. I'm not saying that there's no place for it, but it is not something that is going to support executive functioning across settings. And as I share some additional examples of certain strategies that are offered to kids in academic settings, you're going to see why that's true. So many times when a child is experiencing anxiety, they are referred for therapy. Now, as I said, if there are things that they need to talk through with that therapist, then there could be some situations where that could be beneficial. But if a child is experiencing anxiety due to executive dysfunction and they're sitting in therapy talking about their feelings, that's not going to teach them to engage in the internal self-talk that they need to plan. It's not going to build their ability to future pace and think ahead. It's not going to build their episodic memory, nor is it going to support their time perception or help them encode those things they're visualizing into language. So if they are experiencing anxiety because they're getting stuck on multi-step tasks, or they're feeling really nervous about certain situations because they can't plan ahead or visualize, they're not going to be able to articulate that in therapy. They might not even have the language to explain how they're feeling and all those different emotions and sensations that they're feeling as they're getting dysregulated. So when they're asked things like, how does that make you feel? We're asking them to explain things that many adults don't even fully understand, because what we're doing is asking a child with a brain that is still developing to explain really complex mental processes, and asking a child with a developing brain to explain behavioral and emotional responses that most adults don't fully understand is a tall order. Because let's say that you've gone to therapy and you've processed some past experiences, but you don't have any tools to support your ability to sense time or engage in strategic planning or visualization. And so you leave the therapy room and maybe you've talked about your feelings, maybe you're feeling a little bit better, but then you still have to go out into the world and navigate all those unfamiliar situations, and you don't have the tools and support to do so. This brings me to the next point, which is often tied in with anxiety and those big emotional responses that we often see in kids. So many times when kids are having emotional outbursts, therapy is one thing that people will try. And then we also see a lot of these reinforcement charts, behavior charts, things like that. So we might be talking about it in therapy, and then when kids go into their classroom, they might get a behavior chart. And many times people that are working in the schools or parents or other therapists that are working with the kids are seeing that those behavior problems are persisting. Kids are still struggling to self-regulate across the day, even though they are being given rewards. There might not be good generalization, even if we talk through certain things in therapy. Sometimes the tools being used when kids go out into their day are often not effectively addressing executive functioning. So you can see here that when we are sending kids to therapy and then they're coming back into their classroom and they have a behavior chart, we're almost on the right track where we're thinking these kids need some support. They need some kind of a tool when they come into their classroom, but there's a disconnect. So let's think about what needs to happen in order for us to motivate ourselves. So this is what adults do when they are engaging in self-discipline and self-regulation, and they are motivating themselves to do something that is not something that they prefer to do, or maybe that's challenging and requires a lot of steps and effort. So first, what they need to do is they need to be able to envision the end goal, the desired outcome, the potential reward. This ties in with those future thinking skills. They need to consider choices, options, and consequences. This can tie into things like procedural fluency, also engages future thinking, and then also requires us to engage our episodic memory to think about what we've learned from the past. They have to visualize those steps, estimate how long it will take. They have to think about the potential obstacles and contingencies. Again, fluency and shifting, those types of skills. They have to generate options, which is fluency. And then they have to encode the steps into language. So not only are they visualizing and seeing themselves, we often have to use language to describe what steps we're doing. Sometimes they might even write it down. If you have something that requires you to do multiple steps, you might use a list as a strategy to keep you on track. Then we have to initiate the first step, evaluate our progress, and then we have to watch the time while we're doing it. And then throughout the process, through things like self-talk and visualization, we have to remind ourselves about the rewarding outcome, the choices and the consequences, all those things that we thought of at the beginning. We continually are reminding ourselves of those things as we're going through this process. Kids who are experiencing executive dysfunction are going to be more prone to avoid things because they can't use this process to motivate themselves, and they're going to be more likely to choose things that give them that immediate gratification. Because again, the process of internal motivation is tied in with delayed gratification. So now let's think about what a behavior chart is doing. Well, a behavior chart does not give any reminder or does not give any cue to help envision those goals, those steps, or considering those choices, all of which are necessary in order for us to motivate and move ourselves forward. The consequences and rewards seem abstract. Those stickers might not mean something to kids. So part of the encoding process does have to do with symbolic representation. And so the reason that sticker charts might be motivating to some people is because we can take that sticker and visualize what that means. We might be able to make an association between that sticker and the reward at the end of the day that we're working towards. But if we struggle with executive functioning, that process of pairing those two things together is going to be abstract. And so those stickers aren't going to be that motivating for us. In addition, there's not any support with considering the obstacles and options we might have. What if we get stuck? A lot of times kids are getting stuck along the way, and that's why they're not on task. And they're not getting any support. So if they are refusing to do something because they're frustrated and they can't tell you where exactly they got stuck, that behavior chart that promises them a reward at the end of the day is not going to be helpful. It also does not help with that self-regulation, the shifting, the self-talk. There's not any visual that's giving them a tool to build time perception. They don't really have that experience of moving through a non-preferred task or a learning curve because they haven't gone through all the steps, which are the things that I have on the left side of the screen. You might be giving them the reward on their behavior chart right now, which is within their time horizon, which is within the time frame that they can sense. But if the real reward happens later on in the day, then again, that sticker isn't meaningful for them because the actual reward isn't happening until way later. So now you're starting to see what executive functioning is and why it's a protective factor for a lot of those academic, social, and emotional issues that are impacting kids. So the main thing is that things like behavior charts, talk therapy, and lists, they need to be used in conjunction with direct teaching of some of those internal planning skills. which is why kids continue to struggle with problem solving and friendships, even though they're going to pull out therapy and social skills groups. Now, when we think about how social skills groups are arranged, they're typically arranged in kind of a classroom. A lot of times they're small groups. Sometimes the group might be a little bit bigger, but the point is that they are an academic setting like the one on the left. So kids are sitting there, maybe they have to raise their hands to be called on, but the teacher is presenting information, guiding the discussion. So they're the ones that are providing the structuring around who talks when and things like that. So why that does require you to read the room, it's very different from another setting that might be even more unstructured, like recess or a sporting event like the one on the right. Think about the skills that you would need in order to read the room in a classroom setting that is a lot more structured versus a soccer game when there's a lot going on. And if you have a child who is struggling in a particular unstructured social situation and you're teaching it in a format like the one on the left, that's a completely different skill set.